I'm Joanne Williams, and we're continuing a conversation for our special Crossing the Bridge, where we're talking about what happened 50 years ago on what used to be the 16th Street Viaduct, now called the Father James Groppi Unity Bridge. We have three people who participated in those 200 nights of marches: Prentice McKinney, Peggy Rozga, and Fred Reed. You were all part of the NAACP Youth Council, but Prentice and Fred, you were Commandos. I can remember seeing Commandos walking around wearing the sweatshirts. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, sometimes it was a little scary for me.
How so?
Because I didn't know exactly what your role was. What exactly was the role of a commando? I mean, that's a word that sounds powerful.
Well, actually, look at it in two ways. One, we sat down and planned strategy, along with Father Groppi, on our marches, how they were going to be conducted, so forth. Secondly, our responsibility was to be in between the protesters and the police, who were in between us and the white rioters. So that was the role: keep people safe. Bottom line, figure out how to keep this march safe. When the police tear gas us, keep the line together, keep people from running out into the masses. And if somebody had to go to jail, generally it was one of us.
Peggy, when you were marching, what was going through your mind? Were you scared?
I don't actually remember being scared so much as I remember being aware of having friends around me and having an opportunity to speak to what I saw as a serious problem in the city. The African American community was growing rapidly. The amount of housing available for African Americans was not. I knew people who faced housing crisis situations, and it seemed to me important to take this step. And the Youth Council not only got together to march or to plan strategy, the Youth Council also was a group of friends who hung out together. The office, the Freedom House on 15th and Volite, had a refrigerator that Father Groppi kept stocked with salami and Italian bread.
We appreciate it.
So there was that friendship element that was really important. I do remember the first night after crossing the viaduct and the way back to the viaduct seemed like a huge distance in a way that it hadn't seemed going. And that was because I knew that the police, what I remember best is an officer coming up to us in the park and saying, "Father, would you say a prayer or whatever it is you want to do here, and then let's get out because we can't hold them." So I had an element of knowledge on the way back that I didn't have going, and that was that those white, euphemistically called counter-demonstrators, more accurately, as Prentice said, rioters, were out of control. And when the police tear gassed to disperse them, we also got a whiff.
Fred, do you think that the police were there to protect you against the demonstrators, the protesters, or to protect the protesters from you?
Well, it's not what I think, it's what I observed and what I experienced. Oftentimes, the police did not respond as quickly as they should have before something happened, when they could have intervened earlier. That has been my experience. So it's not what I thought, it's what I experienced.
200 nights you marched across the viaduct. Did you think it was going to last for 200 nights? Was that the plan, or did it just happen that way?
It ended up happening that way. I don't think that there was a time frame that any of us had in mind. There was an issue, and we were confronting the issue. And let me just speak for a moment about the significance of open housing. I think that people don't understand it. They think it's about moving from one community to another. When you look at the fact that there was only one African American alderwoman, and that was Val Phillips, that speaks to the housing pattern. If you take all your African Americans, which they did at that time, and force them to live in one geographical area, they could only elect one alderman, right? And if you spread the white people out, they can elect many, many more. And so the ability to be able to live in another place also spoke to your representation and whether or not you had a voice in government. A second important part was back then, because of house covenants, it was extremely difficult to purchase a home. Well, back then, if you were assaulted by a police officer, you had to own a home to file a complaint. So if African Americans could not own homes, conversely, they could not file complaints against the police officers, and police knew that, and therefore they could take advantage of it. So it wasn't just about where we lived geographically in the city. It was about whether or not we would ever have voice and representation in this city.
Let me talk a little bit about Father Groppi. Catholic priest, dedicated to open housing and to helping these marches move along. But where were his other religious brethren and sisters? Where were the other churches? Did they participate?
There were a handful who did, but he felt pretty isolated in clergy circles, Catholic clergy circles. There were certainly African American clergy persons who were out there in the front, standing up for housing rights and other measures of equality. But yes, he told a story once about the priests were supposed to go on retreat once a year. So he went on his retreat, and Father Patrick Flood sat with him at lunch. And one other priest who was sympathetic came up to the two of them and said, "What is this, the oddballs table?" And that was about the extent of the support.
What about the black church? You said there were some black ministers there, but Fred, did you feel a lot of support from the black churches in Milwaukee?
Actually, I did. Whether they were taken serious by the press is another story. Oftentimes, there were black ministers that would join the line, but they weren't focused. The camera wasn't. They weren't the focal point of the camera. I do recall Dr. Kelly. His first name escapes me, but he was from Metropolitan Church. He was located on 9th and North Avenue. And he did open his church up for a rally. And Father Groppi, Commandos, Youth Council, many people filled that church. The press, we had a good time that night. And that was really welcome. It never happened. It only happened one time. There was, I remember the Reverend Dr. Horde, who would often join the line. They would join the line. They wouldn't march continuously all the way, but they would join the line for 4 or 5 blocks. They were in and out. There was one minister that I shall always remember, Reverend Kirkendall, who I don't think ever missed a march. He was always there. He was always there with the kids and showed great support. And oftentimes when things would happen and kids would react to the pressure that's around, he would often put his arm around the two of them and say, "I got you, I'm here, let's pray. Don't do that, listen to me. I'm not gonna let anything happen to you." He was always there. That was his way, that was their sedative to calm them down. So I'm grateful that he participated. There was at one time the Reverend Champion who was there. So, you know, there were ministers that would come from time to time. Not as consistent as one would like, but they were there. They they would participate.
And you talked about the cameras not pointing their lenses at them, but at other people. What do you think, and anybody can answer this, what do you think the media got wrong during this time?
What do I think
Yes.
that they got wrong at this time? I'm not certain. I think in part you have to look at what is it that the system was saying. The mayor, Chief Breyer, were saying that the good citizens of Milwaukee are not participating in this. So then what did that say about those who were? Okay. I think that they missed a lot of things Peggy talked about, the camaraderie, the purpose, how young people were being inspired to act and become civically involved in their communities. I don't know. To me, it was just a picture of, what do they call this, outside agitators creating disturbances in Milwaukee for no good purpose, and you know what I mean? They didn't really look at, I don't think, why we were there, who we were, and how much impact we could actually have in a positive manner in this system, in this city. I think they just saw us as the enemy. Everybody wants to maintain the status quo. But I want to go back to something Fred said earlier, your question about ministers participating. Peggy kind of pointed out that Groppi sat at a table pretty much by himself, okay? There was Kirkendall, there was Champion, but they were few and far in between, very small churches. The larger churches, Reverend Beauchamp, the mayor's people, and, were totally opposed to what we were doing. They were totally opposed to what we were doing. If you read back your history, you find even the Community Journal was against what we were doing. I mean, what we were doing was not popular at the time. Now, as we evolve over time, because when you get to those first marches, you got what, Peggy, 10, 15 kids marching across the bridge?
Well, when we were picketing at
Aldermen's houses.
Aldermen's houses, we started with 8 or 10.
Yeah. Now, as CBS and all the other major stations come in, all of a sudden you see the marches grow. Now, here are people who hadn't participated before, right? But now this is on the news, and I guess people, especially in the African-American community, start to understand really what it is we're doing and why it is we're doing it. And so many of those who were opposed to us in the beginning, by the time King gets killed, and you look at the march coming up 3rd Street, you see just massive waves of African Americans. I remember standing up on North Avenue on 3rd Street, which is Martin Luther King Street today, looking down towards Wisconsin Avenue. I'm standing on 3rd and North, and they're still turning the corner.
True.
On Wisconsin Avenue, and they're wall to wall.
Now, so many African Americans joined the marches, wall to wall. But what about white participants?
There were always white members of the Youth Council as long as I was a member. After the first 2 nights across the viaduct, when, especially the picture of the Freedom House up in flames, Mark Rosenman, who was the National Youth Director for the NAACP, happened to take a vacation at the end of August that year. He's in Mexico on vacation, and he picks up a paper and he sees the Freedom House, and he said, "Oh, that vacation," and he came. And so it was a call that, and the NAACP, the national office and the regional office, did put out a call for people to join, and that meant lots of NAACP members, African American, but also lots of white members, and white people who affiliated with various religions who were standing for social justice. So, the marches grew larger. Then, speaking of, after those confrontations, people hearing the alarm bell and joining in, probably the most beautiful thing I ever saw was the night after the big arrest on 9th and North Avenue, marching against the mayor's proclamation I think 130-some adults were arrested and an unknown number of people under 18. The next day, I came to St. Boniface Church, and by the time I got there, the rectory was in the middle of the block, kind of up on a hill. By the time I got there, there were people coming out the door, down the steps, all the way to 12th Street, and all the way down 12th almost to Center. Mostly African Americans. Radio announcer on black radio station was saying, go on down and help the brothers and sisters. They need money for bail. They need money for expenses. And there were people lined up to give whatever they had. And the donations were small, but that it was not the size of the donations, but the amount of support. That was the thing that actually made me cry.
Well, thank you all for talking with us. This was a period of Milwaukee's history that changed the city of Milwaukee. Thank you very much, Fred Reed,
Thank you.
Peggy Rozga, Prentice McKinney, for coming and talking with us about the 200 nights of crossing the bridge.